when director Sean S. Cunningham first came up with the idea for Friday the 13th. He had little more in mind than the film's title and the idea that it would be a low-budget horror movie. Inspired by the incredible business that John Carpenter's hit Halloween had done on a relative shoestring budget, Cunningham was eager to emulate Carpenter's success. The director even approached Halloween producer Irwin Yablans to produce the film, but Yablans refused, claiming he didn't want to make another horror movie. Without so much as a completed script in place, Cunningham placed an ad in the July 4th edition of Variety in 1979, proudly proclaiming, "From the producer of The Last House on the Left comes the most terrifying film ever made."
2.
By now, everybody knows that the killer in the original Friday the 13th was not, in fact, the iconic machete-wielding Jason Voorhees, but actually his mother, Pamela. Pamela Voorhees was played by Betsy Palmer, a star of the stage and screen with movie roles dating back to the 1950s and many appearances on Broadway throughout her career. After actresses such as Estelle Parsons and Shelley Winters had passed on the role of Jason's vengeful mother, Palmer eventually agreed to the part, only after her Mercedes-Benz broke down, and the offer of $1,000 a day to film Friday the 13th would be enough for her to afford a $10,000 Volkswagen Scirocco as a replacement. On reading the script, Betsy firmly believed that Friday the 13th would be a piece of shit that no one would see, and she would get a new car out of it, so what would be the harm? In later years, Palmer came around to the fact that she was a much-loved part of the franchise, celebrating her involvement in the films and enjoying taking part in documentaries and meeting the fans.
3.
Actress Adrienne King played the role of Friday the 13th's final girl, Alice. The producers initially wanted Sally Field for the part, but quickly realised convincing a star of Field's stature to do this type of movie for this kind of money was not going to be possible, so they opted for King and a host of unknown youngsters to play the camp counsellors, unaware of the fate awaiting them at Camp Crystal Lake. Funnily enough, Adrienne King was actually appearing in a Burger King commercial at the time Sean S. Cunningham picked her for the role of Alice. Cunningham felt that King gave off the same girl next door vibes as Laurie Strode, the character portrayed by Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, and that King would be the perfect final girl for Friday the 13th.
4.
At that point in time, the only young actor with a claim to fame in the Friday the 13th cast was Harry Crosby, who played Bill. Harry was the son of singer Bing Crosby, the legendary voice who influenced dozens of top musical acts such as Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Elvis Presley and John Lennon. According to Adrienne King, Harry was not keen on talking about his father and wanted to make his own name in show business. King said at the time Harry's sister Mary Crosby had been starring in the mega-popular US soap Dallas and was part of the Who Shot JR storyline that was huge in 1980. King laughed, remembering how she and other cast members would pester Harry to tell them the closely guarded secret of who had shot JR, but Crosby swore he had no idea.
5.
Of course, of all the original Friday the 13th cast members, only one of the young camp counsellors went on to have a very long and successful career in Hollywood. Kevin Bacon made his Hollywood debut in the 1978 comedy National Lampoon's Animal House, but fame hadn't been as forthcoming as the young Bacon had hoped. Besides some work in television and soap operas, Kevin had returned to looking for small stage parts and even waiting tables before he scored a role in the original Friday as Jack, camp counsellor who would eventually meet his demise with an arrow through the neck, one of the movie's most infamous kills. Bacon eventually raised eyebrows in Hollywood with his turn in Barry Levinson's Diner 2 years later, in 1982, and his rise to stardom began to take off with roles in Footloose, cult horror comedy Tremors, Oliver Stone's acclaimed JFK, and the blockbuster Apollo 13, among many more. Over the years, Bacon has been largely quiet on his role in the original Friday the 13th, rarely appearing on behind-the-scenes featurettes or documentaries, as one may expect due to his Hollywood A-list status. However, Kevin did reprise the role of Jack to comedic effect in a series of ads for UK mobile phone provider 3, where he was simply known as Friday the 13th Bacon, along with a number of his other characters, such as Hollow Man Bacon, A Few Good Men Bacon, and Apollo 13 Bacon.
6.
Jason's surprise appearance at the end of the film was the idea of special effects guru Tom Savini, who figured they could squeeze one more big jump scare into the movie. Savini designed the look for the disfigured young boy, referred to on set as the Mongoloid. Jason was played by 15-year-old Ari Lehman in heavy makeup to give him the grotesque, rotted look of a young boy who'd supposedly drowned in Crystal Lake decades before. Actress Betsy Palmer was appalled when she heard that her boy was to be hideously deformed and frightening to look at. It was never mentioned in the script that he was anything other than a regular young boy, a boy who
wasn't a very good swimmer.
7.
Early buzz surrounding Friday the 13th sparked a bidding war between a number of Hollywood studios, each hungry to secure the distribution rights to the next slasher hit. Halloween had proven that horror films could be relatively low-risk ventures for major studios, with comparatively low-budget projects scoring big at the box office. Studios such as United Artists, Warner Brothers and Paramount Pictures all tabled bids for Cunningham's movie, with Paramount securing the rights for a reported $1.5 million. Friday the 13th was the first independent slasher to be picked up by a major studio, with Paramount spending an additional $1 million on marketing the movie. Warner Brothers picked up distribution rights to Friday the 13th in certain other markets, such as the UK and parts of Europe.
8.
The campground known as Camp Crystal Lake in the original Friday the 13th is actually a real-life campground that is still open to the public. Camp Nobby Bosco in Blairstown, New Jersey is a Boy Scouts of America camp that doubles as the fateful summer camp where our counsellors will meet their bloody demise. Even to this day, Camp Nobby Bosco attracts visitors from around the world, eager to see where Mrs. Voorhees took her sweet revenge on those careless teenagers. The camp even holds events and tours for fans of the film, and the movie has been screened in front of the very lake, where some say Jason remains to this very day.
9.
After her terrifying encounters with Pamela Voorhees and her son Jason, Adrienne King had to face up to the very real threat of a stalker in real life. King was followed and photographed by an obsessive fan who would take snaps of her in public and post them through her door to show he had been watching her. Eventually this escalated to the madman breaking into King's house and defacing her artwork, culminating finally in a horrifying incident in which the crazed stalker confronted King and held a gun to the terrified actress's head. Thankfully, King escaped physical harm and the assailant was apprehended and sent to prison, but the effect on the actress's mental and emotional state was understandably highly damaging. King withdrew largely from the public eye for a number of years, taking mainly voice acting roles or background extra work, eventually moving to London, England, where she enrolled in RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art.
10.
Over the years, Paramount Pictures was said to have been somewhat embarrassed by their association with low-rent fare such as Friday the 13th, but the franchise was such a cash cow that the studio went on to produce a further 7 sequels, knowing that the films were cheap to make and a healthy return on the investment was almost guaranteed. In fact, when Paramount released the original Friday the 13th in 1980, the movie brought in more profit than almost every other film the company put out that year. From the 17 Paramount releases in 1980, only the Zucker Brothers smash hit comedy Airplane fared better at the box office than the first Friday.
11.
It's well known that for the climactic scene in Friday the 13th, the role of Pamela Voorhees was briefly portrayed by a man. Actor and stunt performer Tassos Stavrakis, a good friend of FX man Tom Savini, was the man who played the murderous Mrs. Voorhees for the beheading scene. Actress Betsy Palmer was famously appalled when she saw the finished film and noticed Stavrakis' hairy knuckles, which can be seen as the decapitated Pamela grasps at thin air before collapsing to the ground for the final time. Stavrakis was an actor in his own right, having already appeared in George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and was reportedly offered the role of the adult Jason in the first sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, in 1981. Tasso turned down the project as his friend Tom Savini had already passed on the sequel, believing the idea of a resurrected Jason as the killer to be stupid. Stavrakis went on to appear in other horror movies, most notably George A. Romero's Day of the Dead and Creepshow 2.
12.
Writer Victor Miller was hired to pen the screenplay for Friday the 13th under the original working title A Long Night at Camp Blood. In January 2016, Miller issued a notice to production company Horror Inc. indicating his intent to terminate his original grant of rights in 1979 and reclaim the copyright to his original screenplay for himself. Producer-director Sean S. Cunningham argued Miller could not do this, as Miller's screenplay was written as a work for hire. Basically, Cunningham had hired Miller as an employee on the understanding that any work created by the employee would be the property of the employer. In 2018, a US court declared that Miller was indeed legally entitled to terminate his grant of rights when it was decided the initial contract between Horror Inc.'s predecessor company, the Manny Company, and Victor Miller did not expressly state that the work created by Miller would be considered work for hire, and also Miller was not in fact an employee, but instead an independent contractor. The protracted dispute has been at the heart of a lengthy dormant period for the Friday the 13th franchise, with Jason disappearing from our screens for well over a decade since the Friday the 13th remake. However, the long still waters of Crystal Lake may finally seem to be stirring again.
Friday the 13th.
In 2022, it was announced that production company A24 would be developing a prequel series under the working title Crystal Lake. Writer-producer Bryan Fuller, known for the popular Hannibal TV series, was announced as the showrunner and executive producer, with original writer Victor Miller also on board. The show was described to be an expanded prequel to the movies, and fans were especially excited to hear that Fuller could use any and all aspects of the Friday the 13th lore to bring his show to life. Fuller explained that, even though the movie rights are, quote, super messy and probably won't be untangled anytime soon, the television production wouldn't face any such problems, as they could go to hell or space if they wanted to, joking that if the series went 10 seasons, he would be lobbying hard to go to space, a la Jason X. Fan excitement grew as familiar names Adrienne King, Tom Savini and Kevin Williamson were announced as potentially being involved in the show, but optimism eventually faded to frustration as it was announced in 2024 Bryan Fuller had in fact left the project and would no longer be involved in the series. Fuller stated that, for reasons beyond our control, A24 has elected to go a different way with the material. We hope the final product will be something Friday the 13th fans all over the world can enjoy. With budgets rumoured to have ballooned from a projected $3 million to $10 million per episode, A24 opted to fire Fuller and look at seriously retooling the entire project. Fuller was let go a mere 3 months before shooting was scheduled to begin, with a large sum of money already spent on elements of pre-production. Welcome to Derry showrunner Brad Caleb Kane has been announced as the new man at the helm, with a projected air date sometime in 2026. It remains to be seen what will become of Crystal Lake as a series, but fans will be hoping for another visit to the hallowed campgrounds sooner rather than later. It's already been way too long.